We sold in 21 for 2.5 billion. Like that, yes, that's on the outside, that's insane, and it is, and it was awesome. But there's so much more to that story in terms of some days were winning days. I used to joke like some days I'd come home and I'd look at my wife and I'd be like, "We've done it. Like we have built this monster." And other days, 2 days later, I'd come home and I'd be like, "It's over. Like X and XYZ thing happened, and honestly, I think we're gonna be shut down by next week, and the money's gonna be gone." And it's a roller coaster for sure. And what I'm telling people is usually they look at our trajectory and they say to themselves, "Oh, it was always a win. It was always easy. It always went up." And I'm like, every business that's worth its salt has had incredible down days, and it's not always sexy and it's not always fun. And there are days you're just like, I'm gonna give up. And so, thankful that we didn't, and obviously we're grateful for the outcome, but there's a lot that goes into it from hard work to skill to luck to macroeconomics and all the things in between. And so, when you find yourself in those shoes and it's hard or you don't see the light sometimes, like just keep holding on. It's not as bad as you think it is, and there usually is a light at the end of that tunnel.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you outline like, hey, there was like some luck, macroeconomics, right? Some timing, and just like being in the right place, right time. Do you feel that you could basically take that same recipe and replicate that again today?
No, 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 no. So a few reasons, right? Like one, we created basically Venmo and Apple Pay just had come out when we started, and we were saying, let's do what they do, but for the business side of things and throw it on a credit card. So, you know, that technology is so much easier to build today than it was then. And now there's, a lot of players building it. All the big banks are building it. If you haven't seen it, it's coming your way. And so we were like right at the forefront of technology, which allowed us to build this thing that didn't exist prior. Not to mention, 2010 to 2021 was this like historic run of what we'll call it risk on, where it was like, low interest rates. So there's valuations and fundraising and technology, like all that had to intersect with also the right talent, the right people, the right ideas to come together. So it's like if you said to me, "Hey, Alex, go out and start a business today." I mean, I'm sure I'd give it a run. And I'd like to think I'd have some decent shot at it because I know some of the bullets, but the reality is like that whole world, it's hard. And there's some lightning in a bottle. There's some things that you do make happen, and it's a mixture of all that. So it's hard to just be like, well, yeah, I could go start another thing and sell it for billions. I think that would be disingenuous for sure. I'm not Elon Musk.
I was told to ask you a question about getting in the car theory from Divvy. Yeah, do you mind talking about that?
So usually if I'm talking to someone who's starting a company or starting their career, I would argue it's both. Or I guess if you're recruiting. So here was the theory. We basically said to ourselves, like we were growing, we this is probably around 2019, we were about a million in ARR. So like our business was small, but it was starting to grow. And we were like, all right, well, what do we want out of Divvy? And our goal was to get to like 100 million in revenue. It was like, that's what we got to go do. Right. So we sat there and my partner, Blake, who's our CEO, said, we, we said, who's gotten from 1 to 100 million in a time frame and in a style that we respect, that we think is just awesome. So we wrote it up on a whiteboard. And we said, this company, this company, this company, wrote about like 8. And we said, all right, let's go on LinkedIn. Let's go recruit these people. The car theory comes in of like, when you call that company, you're not actually looking for the person who is driving the car, because the car driver, and maybe Ben, I'll see if you can guess it, or if you're picking up on it. Why would you not want to recruit the car driver?
Because they're focused on driving the car, not where they're going.
So, meaning when I say, let me restate the theory. So there's these 8 companies. The car driver is the person who was the head of revenue, who led that strategy over at that company. Why would you want to not recruit that person who was the number one over at at one of those 8 companies? Why not go for number one? But why are you going for number 2 or number 3 or number 4?
Well, because number one's already achieved it, and number 2 and number 4 are hungry.
Correct. That's the easiest answer is right there. But there's a little nuance to it. So number 2 and number 3 have been in the car. And this is important. They actually know the road. They know where it's going. They know what the playbook looks like. They've seen the success. but they weren't the car driver, and they want the car keys to do it a little bit of their own way, but they know enough of what's going on that they can see around corners. Whereas you're all new to it and you're getting to 1,000,000 and you wanna go to 100, every single day is a new corner, and you're like, "What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen?" And so for us, our theory was go to those companies that we have done the thing we wanted to do. Don't hire the number 1 person there because 'cause they've been paid and they're not hungry. Go find number 2, 3, or 4, meaning they're in the car, but they weren't driving, and give them the keys and say, "Come over here and, drive the car for us," and it worked really, really well. Some of our best hires came utilizing that theory and following that strategy.
I mean, that's a little bit like what Richard Branson did, right? Like he's like, I don't know how to do airline. He's like, but I know people who've done it really well, and he talked about like hiring the number twos right there.
Yeah. And by the way, this also goes for people who are not just recruiting, but if you're young in your career and you're aspiring to like, how do I position myself? I tell young people, go get in the car. What that means is like, go figure out when you got a company, figure out who the rock stars are and be like, how do I just get in this car? Do work for them for free, stay with them, go to lunch. Like, just go be in that car and do projects with those people. And ultimately, you'll find yourself in a really good position because you'll have learned the way that they drive and how they approach the business. And that stuff is super, super valuable.
Yeah. So Alex, I find it really interesting. So you said, hey, you kind of sucked at college. I think most entrepreneurs, by the way, say that.
I was a geography major.
You it sounds like you kind of were just treading water for 10 years. What cards did you get in before you were like, hey, I mean, you're all of a sudden go from, hey, I'm treading water to, hey, I want to go from 1 million to 100 million.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if it'd be fair to say I was treading water. And the reason I would say that is like, it wasn't like I was making a ton of money or having big success, but I was in people's cars. So the first job I had was with a guy that had built this business, that consulted Microsoft. And I really respected him and his approach. So I went and worked with him for like a year. And I learned so much from him. And then I went to another business with like one of my brother's older friends that was running something. And I loved how he built out models and how he managed companies, and I learned a bunch from him. And then I went and found another business that was doing some things I thought were interesting, and I helped bring some of the things I learned, but learned a lot from them. So I was constantly jumping into cars of successful people and watching how they operated, how they carried themselves, how they executed. And I'd like to think I was grabbing all that stuff. Ultimately, as I got more into tech and then positioned myself to do Divvy with my partner Blake, that I was dangerous enough and had the tools enough to be like, okay, like I could do this, I could do that, and I could do that. I'm still stuck at those things, but like I have this. And ultimately then we're saying, okay, well, Blake does this, I do this, and then we could figure out who we hire around us to complement those skills. And the only thing on that is, you know, we definitely didn't have all the world's here's another theory. You ready for it? The car theory is one. I'll give you one more. I call it the Billboard Theory. Very, very simple. I do venture capital now, so I talk to a lot of companies that are early and starting something. And one of the hardest things for them to do is to figure out not just what they're building, but who they're building it for, because it's so easy to say, well, everyone or a lot of people. And the one thing that I figured out as a sales rep is like, when is it a square peg in a round hole, and when is it a round peg that fits perfectly with the round hole? And it's the way the customer reacts. It's the way that they respond. It's you understand when you're selling something that people want, and it's called product market fit. And the billboard theory is basically if you can't put a billboard out in that freeway, and if someone's driving 80 miles an hour past it, if they can't know that they're either the target market or not the target market as they're driving that fast with your one sentence, then you don't have product market fit. Like you need to clarify to your target audience who they are and give them that message. And we were very good at that. It was like we knew what product market fit looked like and we could design it. All the other things that came around it, like management and operations and all the things that come, we could hire people that were smarter than us to do those things, but we knew what our vision was and we knew what product market fit was. And if you nail those two things, you can make a lot of mistakes and still be in a good spot.
Yeah. So do you have these theories? It obviously these theories are from like learned experiences. I mean, is it because I mean, were you just always naturally good at this, or was it like this harken back from like your childhood because like conversations with parents and and
So I want to be clear as I'm like, you're giving me too much credit, but I know what I'm not good at. Like I'm actually not a very good manager, and day to day, I'm not a very good operator. in the minutia. Like if you were to hire a COO, I'd be the last person you want to hire as a COO. So there's things that I really suck at. But yeah, I would say like, from an early age, I started businesses in high school. I started them in college. Almost all of them, actually all of them failed, right? They were all like mumbo jumbo. But just the reps and learning it and then watching other people. And I realized after I left college, because again, I said I sucked at college, which is true. I didn't like learning at college. I didn't like learning about random stuff. But when I got out of college, I started being like, oh, I love learning and talking about business. So reading business books and talking to business owners and understanding their businesses, that stuff started to feel natural to me. And I think I was decent at that.
Do you feel that growing up in a household of entrepreneurs gave you like more confidence? I mean, like talk to me about like the first business you started.
Um, let me, okay. So I grew up in Seattle and we taught skiing and we taught swimming at our house for like 30 years. It still goes on. My nieces and nephews do it.
What?
And my parents basically were like, well, we have the pool, and like as the kids, I'm the youngest of six. So my oldest brother would be like, all right, he would have to get the customers, which is the friends and neighbors. And he'd have to create the schedule and he'd have to create, the curriculum of how they're going to teach kids to swim and collect the money and all that stuff. So we've been like doing that as a family for a long time. But, I also then I went and worked as a ski instructor at a place called Alpental, and I think I got paid $6 an hour or something like that, right? So you're driving up to the mountain, the hour away. You're teaching these 2 to 3 year olds, and it's like $6 an hour, $7 an hour, something like that. And you're just like, what am I doing? And then I realized, wait a minute, I ended up calling two families, and I was like, look, I'll drive your kids up. I'll teach them for like 2.5, 3 hours, and I'll drive them back. And they'd be like, cool, we'll pay you like $200 a night. I said, done. So then it was like, well, I'd rather do that once a week, and make $200 as opposed to what it was, $50. And it was a lot of things of that nature that it was like in high school. It was like, don't go work at McDonald's. Try to think through where can you provide value? What are your skill sets? And how can you get paid 2, 3, 4 times more by doing those things? And that's, I think, what we were good at.
What were some of the it seems like to me that you were your life was a very much like an R&D lab. Like, we're like, "Hey, I'm gonna try this. Worst case scenario, like I fail." And which it's only failure if you actually don't learn something. What were some of the ones that you that were relatively like that kind of left a mark?
Yeah, no, I know the exact answer to this question, unfortunately. So I was in college, majoring in geography, like all successful people. And I my sister-in-law, my brother lived in China with my sister-in-law. And in China, that's obviously where they make everything, and you can get fake Rolexes and fake North Faces and all this stuff. And my sister-in-law was like, hey, I actually found a really good jeweler over here. And she's like, I have a jewelry line. So she created a business called Plum Tree Jewelry. Cool. My sister's got great fashion and she's amazing. And I was over there and she's like, you could sell this. Like, look how cheap it is and how much you could sell it for. And I'll make it up because I can't remember, but it'd be like, you can buy this pearl necklace for $5 and you can sell it for like 100. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I was basically became the Plum Tree jeweler of like, I like brought in I franchised it essentially. And, I bought all the stuff. I wanna say it was $1,000, which I think was mostly my money. I'm sure my mom helped me out a little bit. Got in all the mannequins, all the jewelry, and, I ended up hosting a jewelry party at, like, I remember an apartment complex in the community center. I set everything up, and, without ruining the ending, why do you think it didn't work, Ben? Why do you think this was a horrible idea?
There's a bunch of different ways, but put me out of my misery.
Okay, so but you think about this. What in the world does a 22-year-old non-fashion man have any reason to think he can sell jewelry to women, right? I don't know what it's called. I don't know what looks good. I don't know what's good value. I don't know what my competitors are. I don't ever think about it. I don't ever talk about it. I know nothing. The only reason I started this business was for financial reasons. I thought the margins were good. And that is such that to me, the learning lesson was like the opposite of Billboard Theory. I had no clue who my target market was. I had no clue what I was offering them. I had no clue how it compared to the market and why I should be out there doing it. So we did that one thing and shut it down and called $1,000 a waste or whatever, right? Just threw it out because it was like I was eating and sleeping and thinking jewelry. So I didn't even know who to talk to invite to this, to invite to the jewelry thing. And I'm actually really glad I went through it because it was a great example of like, look, you can't just sell stuff because it has good margin. You actually have to know why it's great, and that will allow you to transfer your enthusiasm. And anyways, I was very bad at plum tree jewelry, total failure.
Yeah, it's that was the geography thing. Um well, the fact is you actually graduated. So you got a one up. I made it halfway through junior year, and then I was like, I'm just not good at this college thing. And
My mom would have killed me if I hadn't. So I had a great time while I was there, and I graduated. Yes, and then I had to go to work. So there you go.
yeah, what other theories? It seems like to me like this R&D of like your teenage, your college years kind of led to some really good sort of beginning of like sort of mother sauces of like theories that you developed when you were starting to ride along with other people. Um, at what point did you start to go like, hey, like this this is a really good theory, and you started to like name these things like Billboard Theory.
I don't think I really named or thought about any of the quote framing of these theories until actually after Divvy. Like even the car theory was something that we were just saying this is a good strategy. We weren't like the car theory. We were just like, this is how we're going to recruit top talent that we think is hungry, wants to come earn it. And then looking back on it, the best way to explain it was car theory. So, you know, growing up, I, I I think I just wanted to surround myself with smart people and work really hard, and I didn't care about the money. That'd be my biggest. Well, no, I'll say two things to like to a younger generation, and also really to whoever where they're at in their careers. I'm like, look, I know I'm not the smartest person in the room. Like fact, maybe some rooms, but most rooms I'm not. And the thing I will give myself credit for is I did take the risk. And I someone said to me early like at one point in an early part of my life, and they're like, wealth comes with equity. And I was like, I'm gonna have to take the risk. So when I left my company, I was at a company called Surge. I was making very, very, very good money. And I took like a 75, 80% pay cut to start Divvy. Because we paid ourselves a little, but a big pay cut. And I'm like, I look back at Divvy and there's the luck and the economic macroeconomics and the idea, there are all these things that go into it, all these people that came in that made it big, and it wasn't just me. And I look at all that and I'm like, the one thing I want to give myself credit for is I did take the risk. I left the good paying job and I said, I'm gonna go for it and let's go for it. And sometimes if you're trying to get to a certain mountaintop, that's what it takes. It takes a leap.
It's so true. When you think about someone who's sitting there today who goes, "I have this idea." Like what is the thing that made you go, "And this, like I am going to do this." So was it because the fact is you'd had 10 failed, sort of teenage college like
No, I don't think that is what was like, "Oh, man, I should do this." I will say, again, as a salesperson, I understood what sold. I understand what someone's actually buying versus when they're giving you lip service. So if I speak at a local college in the entrepreneurship schools, I usually say, "Okay, you have your great idea. It doesn't matter what your idea is. Who's the first person you tell?" And this is a fair question to you. Ben, you're gonna start a business. Who would you tell?
I probably would talk with my wife first.
Okay, boom. You're gonna talk to your wife. Who else would you tell?
I'm probably then following it on talking with my sister.
Sweet. And then from there, who else would you tell? No right or wrong answers, but who else would you tell?
Then I'm probably starting to like expand out my ring to like kind of like my close network of like people to kind of test out the idea.
Coast friends. All this is great. It's what we all do, and it's total, and it's fine. Do it to work out some kinks, but it's total garbage. What they say and think is super irrelevant.
I think that was the bend of me where I probably would I probably would then just continue out that rings. But I think the bend of me today would be able to go, I'm going to immediately go out and actually test an actual check writer because they're going to tell me, what am I willing to write a check for? Am I even willing to do it? Right.
let's play a fun game. What's your wife gonna say when you say, "I'm gonna start a business"? Doesn't matter in the business. You say, "I'm gonna start a business." I think there are basically 2 answers. What do you think your wife's gonna say?
My wife is going to say, uh, have you actually ran the numbers? I think she's going to look at two things. What are we going to have to put in? What is the risk? And what is your time obligation?
What is the risk? Like, most everyone, like a wife or a partner or a parent, they're gonna say either, "Honey, you can do everything." And it's fool's errand, but they're just like, "You're the best, go for it." Or they're gonna be like, "What's the risk? It's too risky," right? Like, that's very common responses, and you have to put a check writer. That's the whole point of the Billboard Theory is, like, it's cool to tell your spouse or your friends, that's all great, work it out, but at the end of the day, you gotta go talk to check writers. And they have to not know who you are. That's the other thing I would say is, like, they can't be friends, and so, before I left my job, at Surge to go to Divvy, I was calling I'd already talked to all my friends and family and stuff, but eventually I got a hold of heads of finance of companies 50 to 500, and they didn't know who I was. It was a friend of a friend, and they were annoyed that I was on the phone with them, right? Like, that's the point. They were is a real sales call. Like, they don't wanna be on the call, but they're happy to do it because their friend asked them to. And I could hear their responses, and I could see that they were like, "Oh, you're building what? Like, when is it available? How do I get my hands on it? Wait a minute, go back and tell me that again." The responses were what I would call product market fit, like, they were just jumping off the page, and there was a visceral reaction. It was at that moment where I'm like, "Okay, this is not a square peg in a round hole where I have glossy eyes thinking I have something." I knew as long as we could build what we said we were doing, which was hard, but I knew what we showed them and said, "Hey, we mocked this up. This is what we're building." If we could build that, I knew it was gonna be big, but again, took us like a year and a half to build that, so.
When you think about your basically your 5-year meteoric rise, I think people go, well, of course, right time, right place. But I think the thing is they just see, the hey, you're on Fortune magazine, right? Not suggesting you were, but they just see the entrepreneur magazine articles. Yeah. Like they see like that's the issue with social media, right? They only see the photo album pieces. They don't actually see the fact of like, hey, might lose the company moments.
So I'll give you 2. Well, I can give you 3, but I'll just stick with 2. So, when we first started, we'd raised money from friends and family, and, we'd hired a little too early, a little too big. I think we had, like, 12 employees. We're building this product, and, we were working with US Bank. US Bank, we ultimately you needed a bank partner to lend a credit to issue a credit card, and, we get this email on, like, a Thursday, a random Thursday, that's like, "Dear Blake and Alex, dear Divvy, because of some government compliance thing happening, we're shutting you down." The end. And we were like, first off, US Bank was supposed to be this like great distribution network and this, big name and all these things. And it was like we poured a ton of like $1 million in at this point. Like we had a team, we were doing stuff and they just said, "Hey, it's over." And I remember Blake and I were in his office. We have these big glass windows, and we're looking out and we're just like looking at our employees and we're like, do we go tell them? Like, do we go let them know that it's like stop what you're doing, like a classic, like the newspaper press, like just stop the presses. And if I remember it correctly, we basically said, take a breath, go home, and let's like process this. Let's like go through it. And so by later that night, we were like texting, what if we did this? What if we did that? So we went from like, it is over to like that fight stage of like, we're either quitting right now or we are going to fight. And we're like, let's fight. So by Monday of the following week, we were on a plane to the East Coast, meeting with multiple banks, trying to just be like, this is what we're building. We need another partner. And look, it ended up costing us like $500,000 to switch all of our tech to this other bank. And, cost us another 6 months of time. And the bank wasn't nearly as big and nearly as impressive and nearly as good at tech, like all this stuff. But we were like, we gotta push through this. Like, if you really believe in what you're selling, we're like, we have to keep going. And that was like an early on. And by the way, that's one of like 3 in the early stages where you're like, this thing could have been over. But a much more real one, which we were not alone in this, but I'll tell you our experience in it, which was during COVID. So we had raised, this is a great example of what's online and what's reality. We had raised $175 million from a group called NEA out of California. Okay. So when you see that online and you see that Divvy raises $175 million, everyone's response is like, wow, like they're killing it. Right. So they actually gave us 25 million of signing. And then they said, hey, you got to make this key hire, and then we'll give you another 50. So by the end of the 30 days, we got another 50. So 75, still good. The way we were running the company at the time, though, was like we were not profitable. We were burning a lot because we're taking on this big market. We're going after the market share. And the $100 million, more than 50% of the check, 60-ish% of the check was coming in a year, meaning they had a player option. They could decide if they wanted to extend it or not. Every meeting we had was like, "You're doing great. It's a formality. It's coming. When you need it, it's yours. Don't worry about it." So, but we kept as it got closer to the year, we're like, "Hey, but we really need it." And we're like, "If not, we're gonna like fire XYZ people because we gotta like, we gotta be responsible." And they're like, "No, no, no, no. You're good. Keep going." Well, that money was due March 20th. Is that 19? When was COVID? Okay. Um, the end of that month, we're in the middle of quarantine. The whole world doesn't understand anything about this other than we're in quarantine and full lockdown, and the big cities are desert ghost towns and all this stuff, right? So everyone's in a tough spot. So this wasn't just us. But here's what I'll tell you the difference was. They owed us $100 million and they weren't answering the phone. So one, and we were like, if they don't answer the phone, we have to let go of a large part of our staff. Second, the bank who actually allows us to extend credit to all these customers at any minute could have called 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, could have called and said, hey, we're not extending credit. In fact, we're pulling everyone's credit. And then three, we weren't just losing like, oh, if we lost a customer, we lost, $200 of SaaS revenue, it's like, bummer. It's like, no, they had $100,000 credit line with us. So if they walk away, they're walking away from $100,000 loss and all those other things on top. And so there was a solid 2-week period in the middle of quarantine where like my body, it didn't function. Like it just processing stuff and trying to get through the day. Like I remember 5 of us were in the office because it was, we're trying to figure it out, but everyone else was at home. And I remember like going into one of our meetings and my friend Blakely, who was our CFO, and this is not us, but Blakely was just like, do you need a hug? And we literally started crying and like just hugged each other because it was like we were just so physically desperate, some sort of footing, some sort of land. And there wasn't there. And there was, and like, when you're running your own company, you can't blame the bosses. You can't call some organization. No one bails you out. Like that pressure is very intense. And that was the most I've ever felt that in my life for sure.
Wow. Wow. That must have been just incredibly intense. um, when you think about the success that you had, I imagine people who climb Mount Everest. And I remember seeing this speaker, I think his name was Jamie Clark, and he was talking about he went up to Mount Everest twice. And he gets to the top, and as he's telling the story, he's standing up there, and he's got his arms, he's standing on a chair as he's explaining this. He's like, and I'm here. And I realized, I was expecting this big aha moment. And then I realized I'm only halfway done. Second time it goes around, he gets up there, he's at the top of it, and he like did it again. But this time he's got 2 kids at home, and he's going like, what am I doing? What would surprise people to hear in your meteoric rise, right? Like in all entrepreneur like sort of journeys, right? They're like, man, you went in 5 years from here to here, boom, big payout. Like you've made it, you've arrived. Like you are like by all definition, the pinnacle of success. What would people be surprised to hear you say about that meteoric rise?
Um, so think about just what that guy said, the guy who climbed Mount Everest. You climb Mount Everest, it takes a long time training, but then it's like an actual month to do it. Like it's not a small thing, right? So you get up to the top. What's the reaction to anyone who gets to the top of the mountain when they first get there? It's great. Like, they get to the top, they're super proud of themselves, their body, their endorphins going, they're like, "Ah, yeah, this is great." What do you think he felt as he was coming down? At some point in his descent down, he probably thought to himself, "Huh, what's next? Like, what now?" Like, I had so much purpose in preparing and climbing and striving to get to the top of this mountain that when I got to it, I realized my life's not over. I got there's plenty for me to do, but it's not it's not over at the top of this mountain. And that was me, meaning the first couple weeks, maybe even a couple months were awesome. They were really fun. It was nice to take some of the stress off, to spend time with family and friends. We did a few fun vacations, and it was a honeymoon. It was great. What was shocking to me, and I've said this in the book that I wrote about this kind of conversation. I was with my wife. We were in bed. It was like October, so we sold in June, and the summer was great. But now my kids are back in school. My friends are at work, and I'm going to bed at night. And I felt this feeling that like I wasn't earning my sleep. I no longer like I'd felt such purpose climbing that mountain, or in my case, building Divvy, that every day was like a grind and a work, and although it was hard and it was stressful, like, you could at least at the end of the day be like, "Man, I earned my sleep today. I'm so glad to be in bed." And, I had this feeling where I said to my wife, I said, "Look, I'm gonna say something to you that's a little crazy, like, just I gotta say it because obviously you're my wife. If I can't tell you, I can't tell anyone." And I'm like, "I'm jealous of my friends in the rat race." And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I know it's nuts, and I can't say this on social media. I can't say this to anyone. They won't they'll say, 'Cry me a river,' which I totally understand. I totally get it. Like, my problems are not the worst problems in the world. But what I realize is like, there's always another mountain to climb, and I didn't have purpose anymore. And I actually loved the purpose that I felt in building Divvy, and I really, really missed it, where my identity was changed, my motivation levels were changed, my my daily routine was changed. So many things that gave me dopamine hits and gave me energy and gave me drive were gone. And now, yes, I had money, I have money. And it was, it was in the bank account, but I was like, but that's just a number. That like my daily day kinda sucked, and I was like, "Oh, man, I used to love golf, and now when it's the only thing I do, I'm like, I kinda feel worthless, and I miss that I'm not building something and growing and challenging," and it was weird. That's the only way I can describe it. I know people don't care, and it's the world's smallest violin, and I totally understand that, but I'm trying to be transparent and say that was a very weird spot to be in.
Yeah, but I think though I appreciate you sharing that, Alex, because I had a couple experiences, not like mountaintop of like this, but like after my son died, my team stepped up, and honestly, I came back to where 95% of what I was doing beforehand, they had completely like delegated out. Which most entrepreneurs are like, "Wow, that's amazing," right? Like you just freed up all the time. But I'm curious if you had like this moment, because I think it's in the microcosm. Even if you're not an entrepreneur, right? Your kids leave the house.
Totally. I think the parents of the kids leaving the house is like a great example, specifically for moms that stay at home and raise their kids. They have mountains of purpose up until that day that the kids leave the house, and then all of a sudden they find themselves being like, "What do I do?" And, I think it's a very similar feeling, or when a guy retires or whoever retires from the business world at 60, 65, 70, they're like, "Shoot, what do I bring to the world?" And it's a lonely feeling, even if you've done a lot of successful things, like the guy who climbed Everest, he can't then go back and climb a small hill up the road and feel that great about it. It's like he raised the bar and the adrenaline, and now it's like, "Oh, wow, okay, I guess I have to love it, and I can no longer do it for other people." I have to find joy in whatever I'm doing, and I'm not doing it for other people's praise or other people's, whatever you wanna call it.
Yeah. So how did you answer that question? Because the question that popped up for me, and is like, who am I? If not this, then what?
Wasn't s Okay, so I went on a weird little journey. I left, obviously, like I said, Divvy, and then, for a while, it was great, and then I went through that little phase, and what was weird about that phase is, like, I remember I was, looking for my dog in my neighborhood, and I just moved to the neighborhood, so I didn't know everyone super well. But I knew this guy, so I rolled down my window and I said, "Hey, if you see a little black dog, can you let me know? Like, I've lost my dog." And he looks in, like, he's older, but he looks in and he looks at me and he's like, "Oh, the Divvy guy." And I was like, "You know my name's Alex." But it was like this visceral response of like, that was my identity, was being the Divvy guy. And that was really weird because it was no longer the Divvy guy. And, I started to figure out like, oh, I actually tried to play piano with my daughters. So I joined their little piano recital and learned piano, and that was like fun. But I'm like, I'm my daughters were embarrassed; they didn't want me to keep doing it. Then I, tried to do magic card lessons, like sleight of hand stuff, because I was like, well, that'd be fun. I've always wanted to do this. And I realized I was just doing what I call hobby hill, which is just like I wasn't actually trying to achieve anything. I was just trying to stay busy. I was trying to just have things to do, and I had things to do, but I wasn't actually trying to achieve or build anything. And so it took me about a year before I ended up figuring out what my next mountain was, and to say, "Great, let's go try to conquer something else." Not for money purposes, not for anything other than like giving myself something to like go after and feel good about building. And it took a while. Yeah, I was surprised at how long it took.
Yeah, it seems to me that the people that I've been around who have had, and not, you don't have to have billions of dollars of success, right? But like who've had success, that there's a certain point when you realize that more money just means more like wanting. And that there's a point, I don't know if you find that to be true, right? And then there's a certain point you've satisfied that there's a currency exchange. It's no longer about how big your balance sheet is. And can you talk a little bit about your journey through that? I mean,
So I had an interesting experience with my partner. We were driving on the road. This is before Divvy sold. We're on the freeway, and he basically looks at me and he's like, "What's your number? Like, what's my mountain? What's the number I wanted to make where it's like, oh man, what's my dream number?" So I gave him a number. And I said, "Here's my number." And fast forward a year and a half later, we sold the company, and it was higher than my number by a decent amount. Okay. So all intents and purposes, my number was here and I landed way above it. And it was like, I should be just thrilled out of my mind. But the weird thing that happened is my partner, because it was, his original idea and his family money and totally get it. He had more equity. So he made a lot more than I did. And I remember being like, oh, but if I had as much as him, I could do XYZ. But then I also knew that he was saying if I had as much as this guy above him, he could do XYZ. And I realized that like there was always another number, always another mountain. There was just, it actually was really weird for me to process. It took me um quite a while. And do you know Bible stories at all? Because this is the best way to explain it. So you don't have to be religious. Let me explain the parable. It will help understand how I process it. And I think it's helpful for everyone else. So, the parable of the vineyard, I think it's called. People come in at 9, 10, 11, all through the day, and basically work in this vineyard, and at the end of the day, some people worked 8 hours and some people would work, like, 1 hour, and they ultimately go to the master, and the master says, "Here's all your money," and everyone got equal. Well, the people that were working at 9 AM were super thrilled at 9 AM to have this job and to work all day and to know that they were gonna get money, but they were mad at 5 PM when they got their money, which was the exact amount that they had asked for. Do you remember why they were mad?
yeah, yeah, because they had worked more than the other people.
"Hey, those people only worked an hour, I worked 8." And it was like, but hold on, irrelevant of them, you asked for, 10 gold coins or whatever it was to work all day so you could feed your family. We agreed, and you were super pumped at 9 AM. And I realized that I was the 9 AM laborer. I realized that I was only mad or not happy because my partner made more than me. And that was like a weird, like, "Oh, wait a minute. I'm the bad guy." Like, I'm the one that has this jealousy or this greed or whatever it was. And I had to like internalize it and be like, "No, hold on. Am I satisfied with who I am as a person? Am I happy with who I am as a person? Am I proud of myself and who I am as a person?" And that's a process that's hard for a lot of people to digest because we're so used to like, well, if I could own that thing or do that thing or have that much money, the world will look at me as a success. And I had to go through a lot of different experiences to realize like that's if you're measuring it on that stick, then you're probably going to end up failing anyways.
Yeah, do you mind sharing what are some of those other experiences? Because I think that this is such a critical thing. I think that people, when they look at success, it's like, I get there and they realize it's going to be like the heavens are going to open. and everything's just gonna be great. You're gonna open up the joy meter, your joy engine's just gonna be like running. And every little mountaintop I've come to, I realize it is like hollow. And it actually, the higher I've gone, the less the greater the like the valley is below of like of that's it's that it's empty.
Yeah. So I'll kind of cut to an end result. I talk about this obviously in the book, and I have this conversation with a lot of people. I say some of the well, let me phrase it this way. The book covers three pillars. Purpose, which we've talked about. Like if you yourself don't have a purpose, you're gonna just be in a world of hurt. That'd be my response. So people always say, why don't I sit on a beach somewhere? Because they don't have to work. And I'm like, I'm telling you, I've done it and I've seen it through a lot of people, and it's miserable. The people that don't have purpose are not happy. One. Second pillar is relationships. The people that are rich have money. The people that are wealthy have relationships. And if you're fortunate, you can have money and relationships. But fundamentally, it is so important to be like, what matters most? Is it really the dollar figure, or is it the fact that you have great marital relationship or and great, children and close family friends and a network and whatever that looks like? And if you can do that, like whether your number, and I say this all the time, this is kind of some people will scoff at this question, but I'm going to ask it because I think it's relevant. As people aspire to a number, what's the difference between someone with $20 million dollars and someone with 40 or $50 million, like day to day?
Nothing.
Like literally nothing. No, well, sorry, I know because I talk to a lot of these people. I interview them. I know who they are. Nothing. So when people are sitting there and saying like, well, I got 10 or I got 20 or I got 30, but man, if it was 50 or 60 or 100, it's like just such a fool's errand because it doesn't change what you do every day. And I'm like, most people wake up every day and they have an iPhone, some version of an iPhone. They watch Netflix, they eat some version of Chipotle or McDonald's, and we all have decent beds and decent car. I mean, a Tesla, which used to be this fancy car, is now the cheapest car on the road. And it's like, the money and the dollar figures is not the feeling. That's not the whole that's not what's gonna actually, like, feed you for life. It's this purpose and relationships and kinda having those things. That's what matters, and that's what lasts.
Yeah, Alex, I want to talk a little bit about relationships as we're kind of exploring success, right? I mean, we've talked, and I think you probably get asked a lot of questions about like your entrepreneurial success, but I'm curious, how was the journey with you and like your family, right? I mean, as you're building, you have this weight of all these different things, right? I mean, you clearly have some like, I mean, this is a just for the audience, this is a guy who literally, just make sure I have this right in my note, who has the world Guinness World Record for longest game of pickleball, for God's sakes. I mean, so we got some like tenacity.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And we'll come back to the pickleball. Can you talk a little bit about your journey as you evolved in your identity and as you're building your sort of like moonshot as a husband and a father during this whole time frame and how that evolved?
So, one thing I would say, the first thing I thought of, and then I think I can come back to some of it, is like, what was the most funny is the money hit our bank account, and I was like, "Yeah!" Like, I'm all excited, I'm like, "Let's go do this, this, this." And my wife's response was very different than mine. Her response was, "No, we're not doing anything. We're not changing anything, and I don't want it to change because I don't want our kids to be, spoiled brats and blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like, you don't want what I want with the goal I've been working towards this whole time? Like, how are we not eye to eye? I thought you were with me the whole time." And it was like, "No." Like, she's like, "I don't want to change this." And I was like, "Well, I definitely want to change that." And that was weird. It took us a decent amount of time for us to we were lockstep for 15 years or 14 years, and then all of a sudden it was like, "Wait a minute, there's a little bit of a break on what we expect and what we want and where we're headed." And we had to, like, bring that back, and, part of it, she had to come over to my side, and I had to come over to her side, and we've figured it out. But it was just shocking to me that the fact that money changed my relationship with my spouse. That's weird. That's I never had thought was going to take place, and I see it all the time, and I'll give you a very, I'll put it into someone else's perspective, but I will tell you this is what happens, and, I'm gonna call it the curse of convenience, a nice little title for you, okay? Man makes a lot of money and he's worked super hard, makes the money, doesn't matter, but he makes the money. He wants to go celebrate. He wants to take a private jet to New York or to Vegas, and he wants to go do those things. But his wife has 3 kids at home who are in elementary school, and she's like, "I wanna be a mom, and I wanna stay home and be close to our kids and be a mom." And he's like, "Well, I wanna go do these things." Do you realize, and my wife said this to me, and this was powerful when she said it. She goes, "Alex, everyone in your life says yes to you. Your employees, your friends, people that are asking for money, they all say yes to everything you want. The only person in the world that says no is my wife. She's the only one that's like, nope, nope, nope." And she said it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," she's like, right. So what happens so much in so many of these marriages is that husband who gets the curse of convenience is that everything is easy. You can buy everything, you can do everything, and everyone says yes to him. And his wife's like, "No, I don't wanna do the thing you wanna do. I wanna stay home with our kids." And his ego is like, "Well, I wanna go do these things." That's where divorce happens all the time. Like, they trade in for a younger model, and they sleep with their secretary or whatever. I mean, again, it just happens, like, so much, it's kind of crazy, but I've seen it, like, countless times. And, that type of thing is, like, a fascinating, like, the fact that money could come in and ruin your family, what you thought was indestructible comes in and shifts everything, and now you're banging against walls, and, it's really sad how often it ends up damaging the family. I mean, way too often.
I'm curious, you brought up the word like the ego, because I think when you are like a really successful, and whatever the definition of success you want to put in there, like where people, you get a lot of people to say yes to you. And I'm curious because it's interesting to use ego as it pertains to this, your relationship with your wife, because oftentimes our partners are the ones who know us best, whether we like it or not. How much did you have to have the death or let go of, or however you want to use the word, of your ego, and to so that your true wealth, balance sheet, your relationship with your wife and your kids could actually outsize the huge ginormous check you just got?
Sure, I'll give you some examples of this that, it's like I have 4 kids, and they're great kids. But by the way, everyone's kids are great, until they get older, and so I don't know where my kids will end up. I think they're really good kids, but, entitlement and spoiled and trust fund elements, those things come. Not those kids weren't bad in the beginning, but something happens that ultimately makes them make some bad choices. Anyways, we clearly, like, my daughter, I remember this one as an example. My daughter wanted this new sweatshirt. It was a Lonely Ghost sweatshirt. I don't know if you have kids that like Lonely Ghost. It was like a fad, and you gotta have the Lonely Ghost. And I'm like, it's just a sweatshirt, but it doesn't matter. A lot of my kids' friends' parents were buying the sweatshirt. It was $60. And it's a nice sweatshirt. They're buying this sweatshirt, and they're buying it for their kids, not for their birthday, not for Christmas, just to like buy it for their kids. It's fine. I'm not judging them in that. They're allowed to do whatever they want. But for Megan and I, we started to realize, like, hold on. I We know the answer is yes, we can afford it. Yes, we can afford that $60 sweatshirt. It started to be like I had to talk to my daughter and be like, well, but what's the next thing you're gonna ask for? What's the next thing you're gonna ask for? If I just buy this for you now, I'm doing you a disservice for the rest of your life. What are you gonna do to earn money and decide if this is the right value for you to buy? So she ended up having to, I think we said we'd split it, so she went and made 30 bucks doing whatever, and I think she might have bought that sweatshirt, but the next time it came up, she's like, "I don't want it that bad. I don't wanna go make 50 bucks to pay for the $100 pair of shoes or whatever." And it was just this weird thing of, like, you have to it's harder. It's much easier for me to just swipe the credit card and give her the fricking sweatshirt, like, trust me. She's mad at us when we don't do it. We're having this whole conversation. If she breaks her phone, she's gotta pay for it, and it's like, it's so much easier. My credit card will work if it's just like, buy a new phone and let's just move on. It takes a lot of work to be like, "No, I'm not gonna let you buy it, but I'm saying no to you," and now we have to process this as a mom and dad and a daughter to figure out, what are you bringing to this relationship, and what value do you have, and what decisions are you making? And it's easy when you don't have money, you can say, "I can't afford it." And it's easy to swipe the card when you can't afford it. He's like, "I can afford it." I think sometimes it's underestimated to try to explain to your kids that you have the money, but you don't want to pay for it, and they need to earn the money when they're like, "Wait a minute, but we have the money." And I'm like, "But you don't have the money." It's a whole thing. So, that took a lot of energy from us as parents to try to figure out how to do it. And I'm sure we screw it up all the time. So I don't want to sit here and say we're perfect parents because I know for a fact we're not. But we've tried to do elements because my wife's biggest fear, my biggest fear too, is screwing up our kids. If I made all this money only to screw up my kids and they end up in really bad positions because I enabled them with money too early, too often, what did I do? Like, what was the American dream all for? Why it starts to turn into a nightmare pretty quickly.
It seems like this idea that we've been put in our head that like success and what winning looks like. You know, if you're an athlete, it's like winning championships, right? You know, if it's a mountain climber, it's climbing Mount Everest. If you're an entrepreneur, it's about having these like big, great exits. But it almost seems to me that the way to getting to the mountaintop is hard, and you have to go across crevasses and like navigate all the way through. And sometimes it's like that Buddhist saying called "Unalome." It's always forward, never straight. But it seems like what I'm hearing you say, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like your book, because that's actually like Mount Everest. You're only halfway there. You actually haven't arrived because it's only halfway there. You have to like come back down to actually base camp, like when you actually get the big check, and that almost seems almost more fraught with it because if you're coming from Mount Everest, you're tired. You've been up probably since like 2:30 a.m., right? To finally get up there. And then you still got it back. Winds, it's cold, it's the lack of oxygen. And is that what it feels like after you got there? It's like,
Think about even what you're like, this is a good analogy, right? Like you get to the mountain, you have to come back to base camp. And I would say base camp's reality, which is like where your friends live and your kids live and your neighbors live and the world you love lives, right? And part of you comes down, you want to be like, strut your stuff and be like, look what I did. But base camp doesn't want that. Like base camp, like, get out of here, right? Like, so it gets it's an incredible privilege and an incredible opportunity, and I'm super grateful for what we have, but there's always little things that pop up, whether it's a family member asking for money or a friend asking for money or, you know, your kids starting to think that they now get to live a different life when you don't want them to. All these little things that happen back in base camp cause emotional turmoil, and you got to figure out how to handle it. And you got to live in a world where, can I make this benefit us and our family and our friends and our community, but in a way that is works for everyone? And the answer is probably not, because a lot of people are going to be mad you didn't put money in this thing or you didn't give them money for this reason. And that there will be jealousy from people that are like, well, why did he make it and I not make it, or whatever. I mean, it's like it goes all over the map. And I wouldn't say I've like quote lost a bunch of relationships because of the check, which I'm thankful for, but there are some, and there are people that I'm not as close to as I once was because there's some gap, whether it's my fault or their fault, who knows? Only God can tell us. But it is coming back to base camp is its own special hike that takes its own set of skills. And when you have the pride and ego of look what I've done, you've got to shave a lot of that off, and you've got to meet people where they're at, and you've got to figure out how to live back in the world that you want to live in, because those are your friends, those are your family, those are your teams, those are your schools. And it's good, but it can be challenging.
so I'll go back to your thing. What's the difference between 20 million and 50 million? Do you feel like your life would be any different if you had 20 million? And I'm not suggesting, by the way, just as I say this number to the audience, like this is, yeah, I have no idea. Is there a difference between 20 million and 700 million in your life, in like the life you're leading and want to lead?
In my conversations, because of the book, I've interviewed a lot of these people, and I've gone around and done some speaking things to these types of people. More often than not, the person with 25 million is a lot happier than the person with 700. And I don't know if we have time in this podcast to really break down why that is, but the money becomes so big and such an elephant in every room that it changes every relationship they're in, from their kids to their spouse, to like, it just becomes such an elephant that it starts to just take over and how things are handled. And a lot of people that are in those shoes, I think a lot of them would kind of love to like go back to anonymity and get rid of a lot of it and go back down to 25 and 50 or whatever that, a good number, obviously a big number, but that a world where it's like they still want to work, they're still building, they're still growing, they're not living in some crazy new reality. Again, a lot of people won't relate with what I'm saying, but I'm just telling them because I've seen it. That the people that have so much, it every room you walk in, everyone's like trying to figure out how they get your money or how they talk to you. And I just watch it. I can see it. And I'm like, the people that are genuinely happy are the ones with purpose and relationship and they're living a legacy and they're probably, well off, but not like freaking crazy, crazy.
But I think people can actually assimilate. Now, granted, people might be like, again, I just want to be clear. I have no idea what Alex's check is, but like, it's obviously enough where it's generational, life changing, not your generation, generations, like type changing money. But, I think it is actually approachable because what I'm hearing you say is that, man, I miss the need that like I needed to hunt. Like, I think it's very instinctual.
That's a great way of putting it. I needed to hunt. Because what happens when you go hunt? You come home, you put food on the table, and you can sit there and be like, I provided today. You know what the weird concept is? Like, my wife, she stays at home with the kids and I work, right? Well, that was a great relationship when she stayed at home with the kids and I needed to go work. It is a funny little twist when I no longer need to work and she could just walk away from me, take half the money, and she's like, "I don't need you. I She doesn't need me anymore." We don't have the same balance of trust that we had, and now it's a different relationship because she doesn't need it. She doesn't need me to go hunt and bring back food. The food's there. She's got it. And that's like, I remember, like, thinking about that and talking with her. I'm like, "Oh, man, now what value do I bring you now? I gotta figure out, like, how I can show her love and be there and all that fun stuff," but it's like that's a weird little thing that you don't think about, but it's part of it.
Yeah. I think back to my wife and I before we built like all of our businesses. I remember we bought our first house is like a total like upstairs, main level and basement all combined was like 1,400 square feet. Um but we bought it and we didn't have any furniture and we like bought, like an air mattress and we had like our dinner. Like these are the moments where I look back though. I mean, those are really incredible like moments. Not that anything now isn't, but like those moments. And um how have you continued to have a desire and need for self-development, that self-excavation of like continuing to like find and drive like who you are and who you are becoming?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what that means, but, I the book's called Factory for Good. Let me give the analogy because this is answers the question. The analogy is like, look, if you just everyone goes to a factory, everyone works every day and on something, and the production is money, which by the way is not a negative thing. It's like that's how you provide education and opportunity and food and shelter and safety, all the things. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But that production and that factory that leads to money, at some point, the argument I'm trying to make to people, having seen it with other people, is you have to retool it from the factory producing money to the factory producing good. And now money is just an input. It's a resource into this new factory, which means you have to figure out, what am I and or my wife and I and my family, what are we about? What good in the world do we want to do? And is it local? Is it national? Is it international? All sorts of questions. Where do we put our time, our effort, our talents, and in this case, some money to make the world a better place? And that has become like my passion project of like, well, I've got to figure it out for myself, but I'm also trying to help other people figure it out for themselves so that they don't just stay in their factory and produce money. And those that are doing that well, they get focused on just building and building and building and making that number bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm like, no, 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 no. If we do this right, it's the best thing for our families, for our communities, and for the world at large. If we can figure out the good we want to do in the world and still start executing on a sustainable annual basis and create something that's bigger than money. It's more about who you are as a person and the values you hope to hold and the where you want to leave a dent in this place. And so that has been the journey for the past couple of years. And I think I'm doing some of it decently well, and other stuff I'm still trying to figure out. But yeah.
So instead of Divvy being your canvas, what I'm hearing you say is like the world, your community, your family, the relationships is your new canvas. I'm curious, what's that vision if we're sitting here in your 5-year sort of Divvy moonshot, right? But in this case, your factory for good. Like who's in the car? Who's in your car that you're going, okay, they've done it. They've done it.
Yeah, it's a good question. There are some actually, what I would say is I've met people along the way that are super inspiring, and I'm like, "Look what they're doing. Look at, like, how their family's involved in this project for good that they're doing, and it's shaped their kids and their lives and their families and their communities, and it's, like, super inspiring." Like, it motivates me to just like, "Oh, that's what I wanna do." So I've met enough of those people, and my 5-year vision is like, look, right now, my Factory for Good nonprofit is meeting with families that are wanting and willing to give financially, and we take that and ultimately vet out. We figure out what we do a lot of stuff to figure out what their good is, and then we help figure out. We vet the organizations to donate to, and then we give them reporting. We want to make that a very good experience for them. So we take families and we kind of act as their family office, but just for the charitable side. We've got about 20 families involved right now, but our goal is to get to 500. And if we can get 500 families across the United States or world, but in the United States, giving on a sustainable, recurring basis, we think it is a win-win-win for themselves and their families. But we can start to move a very large dynamic ball of donations to the causes in the world that matter, dictated by the families. And I think if we do that, we can leave a real impact on this world. And right now, that's our 5-year vision, and we're going for it.
That's amazing. Um, after our show, I need to give you a contact of someone who'd be super interested in what you're talking about. How does someone do Factory for Good if they're like, well, I don't have 100 million, I don't have 50 million, I don't have 20 million. Like, can you talk about like the everyday person who's looking at this to be able to go, how do we translate? Because I think the mistake in people listening to this, and I think the people who are maybe like hear your story, they're like, well, it's easy for him to say he's got millions of dollars. And I don't, and I'm not hearing you say that. This is a model that seems to work on any economic scale.
So back to my story of the parable of the vineyard and back to my story when I left, it was like, oh man, if I had X amount of money, I could do everything I wanted and I could start giving it away. And then when I landed above that, I was like, I don't really want to give it away. I want to get more, right? Like there's no number that people are going to get to where they're like, oh, now I'm ready. Now I'm ready to give. My point to them would be go figure out what your good is. And your good might be in your local church community. It might be in your neighborhood. It might be at your school. It might be coaching a team. I don't care. Write it down. Go through the process of you and your partner and your kids being like, what are the things that we care about? And if you say homelessness or food, yeah, you might not have Bill Gates level of money, and I don't either, by the way, to go solve that problem on a global scale. But if you start to realize, like, oh, like we say it in our family, we the beans choose to be, and we grateful, loyal, kind, confident, humble, and hardworking. It's like that's what we stand for. So when we don't have money, that's what we stand for, and we have to do the service projects and volunteer here and help out there. But we as a family know what our good is. I would tell people go on that journey. Just figure out where you want to give your time and energy, where eventually you would want to write a check. Go put your hands and roll up your sleeves and have a good and write it down and start to set some goals. And it might be X amount of volunteer hours, or it might even just be freaking putting them in your prayers. I don't care, but define your good and start living it. And I think if you do that, you'll be surprised where you can end up and how much you can have an impact, even if it's not, quote, writing a big check.
That's amazing. Hey, Alex, I want to be mindful of the time here, and I want to say thank you for being on the podcast. If people want to know more about you, they want to follow you, they want to find the book, they want maybe what you're doing is like a good that it's part of their good mission. Um, where can they find you? Socials, website?
So I'm not really on social. I do have a LinkedIn presence, but I'm not on social. But go to factoryforgood.com. And we have a newsletter, we have content, we have a bunch of engagements on, purpose, relationship, and legacy and different technologies there. So yeah, it's great. Come to factoryforgood.com, sign up for the newsletter. If anything in this conversation stuck out to you or you want our help with your kind of factory as a family, we can help facilitate that. Reach out. We'd love to chat. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love your story. I love just your life learned lessons, and I feel like we're getting the benefit of you actually having the windfall and also realizing that windfall also creates some new hardfalls. And one of the things I like to do Alex, is let our guests leave the last ripple, the last thought, the last sort of either question or statement. And so what do you want the audience taking away from our time together today?
Oh boy. This is like, I've got to drop some like wisdom nugget here, but look, I'm really grateful for the journey I was on, and I'm grateful for the way it's played out. I would tell people that is not a measure of success. So whether your journey ends up with a bigger check than ours or a smaller check or no check, it's it's the process and journey of doing it with the people you're doing it with. That's really what's going to last and matter, and the relationships you build. So that to me, anyone can do successfully and anyone can be mindful of. And if you are measuring life that way, then you can become wealthy without a doubt. And I think way too many people assume that the financial reward at the top of the mountain is going to give them that feeling. And what I want them to know is it's not that, it's those relationships and those moments of being in the trenches with the people that you really love and respect. That's really what you'll cherish. And that's the thing that you should aspire to.
It's amazing. Alex, thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing so generously.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.